All right, and now to introduce today's presenter. Christopher Allison is the director of the McGrill Center for the Dominican Historical Studies at Dominican University, a historical research center and archive devoted to the history of the Order of Preachers in the United States. I'm going to move this over here. Just 1 second, sorry. The archive consists of the records of the national and collaborative Dominican organizations, as well as records of now closed monasteries in the eastern United States. Dr. Allison is a historian of American religious history. He teaches in the history department at the Graduate School of Information Studies. Prior to coming to Dominican University, Dr. Allison taught at the University of Chicago as collegiate assistant professor of the humanities. He has also taught classes and seminars at Harvard, Columbia, and the American Antiquarian Society. Dr. Allison earned his PH.D. in the history of American civilization from Harvard University in 2017 and an AM in the history from Harvard in 2013. Before that, he earned an MAR in American religious history from Yale Divinity in 2010 and a BS in social sciences education from Olivet Nazarene University in 2006. He published on a diversity of topics such as portraiture in early American history painting, Catholic relics and material culture found in the early settlement of Jamestown, teaching with collections, early Mormon women, Quaker collecting, transatlantic religious intellectual exchange, good luck remembering these guys, and English pottery and celebrity culture. And most recently, he has been actively writing about the history of women religious in the 20th century. His forthcoming book is Protestant Relics, Capturing the Sacred Body in Early America from University of Chicago Press. Dr. Allison is on the conference committee of the upcoming conference on the history of women religious at Notre Dame in June 2025, entitled Lives and Archives, and is on the board of the Chicago Collaborative Archives Center. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Christopher Allison.
Sure. Okay, welcome. Thanks for coming, everybody, and thanks for welcoming me. And I'm really honored to be here. I feel like I think about the archives of women religious all the time now, and so this is a good way for us to talk. I have really bad allergies this morning, so if I start coughing, just give me some grace. But today I'm going to do a little bit of blended of some formal things to say, but also some other kind of more open-ended things, and I hope at the end we can have a Q&A, but also just talk to each other. So I think Carlinthia is going to come around with the mic. Chris, could you please move the microphone up? Yes. I don't think it goes. I'm a little too tall. I could use that. Sure. Yeah, it's all right. Okay, that better? All right. Okay. So I won't start again. I just said hi, basically. Okay, so yeah, this is an object from one of our collections, which we really like to bring out to talk about book arts, and that's one way that we use our archive of women, like women religious archives, at the university to teach in the graduate school. There's a lot of Dominican University SOS grads here, and which is usual. We're the only one of three Catholic institutions that have a library school in the country, I believe, unless things have changed. Okay, and so a little bit about the work that we do. We are named after Sister Nona McGrill. She was a very prominent Dominican in the 20th century. She was, you'll probably know her from many things, but she was kind of mostly a big textbook writer, and then also was a president of several of our institutions. But she was very passionate about history. She was the first, I think she was the first female author to submit a positio to the Vatican for a saint's cause, and really impressive woman. And that's her on the far left at a groundbreaking. And then I'll just say a little bit about what we have. I think Carlinthe covered a lot of it. We have collections of contemplative nuns, which would be First Order Dominicans, and laity. We also have the Central Province of Laity. The papers are prominent Dominican scholars, such as Suzanne Nofke. If you have read anything about Catherine Siena, you would know about her. Father Richard Woods, who was a kind of scholar of Meister Eckhart. And then artists like Sister Mary of the Compassion, which I'll have a piece of Sister Mary of the Compassion a little bit later. And then we also have a Sacred Spaces project, which is, I could show you if we have time, about how we go and preserve the campuses of mother houses and churches around the country. And Sister Mary Navarre is here, and she did one with us, and she narrated it, so maybe I'll pull that one up so you can see what that looks like. All right. Next. So what are we going to talk about today? We are going to talk about kind of the nature of religious collections and how they're very unique kind of archives compared to maybe a historical society or a university archive. Just a little bit, and I don't have to remind this group because you all work in them. So, and then a little bit about, I already talked about the McGrill Center, then we'll define a crisis and kind of talk about the arguments that we can make for the value of our archives, and maybe also you have better arguments so you can also contribute later on. And then where and how we should put them, where should we put them is the biggest question. A little discussion about money, if that's something that if you're looking at a community that's looking to move your archive somewhere else, that's always a big discussion. Who is going to tell your story? That's what Sister Mary Navarre always asks people. And then suggestions for the future as we think about the future of Catholic collections. And then we'll do some discussion ideas, and then I'll have a shameless plug for ACWR next summer, so I hope to see you all there. Okay, these are all kind of objects that I have used in my work, and they all come from religious archives. And they kind of all symbolize just how rich they can be. I guess the only exception would be the Jamestown Reliquary, which is in a historical collection. And you can see, like probably the same as your collections, just the diversity of material and the challenges of it. Plaques are not preferable to paper, right, for example, because they're bulky and they take up linear feet. But also, I have a few artifacts. This is an account down here, the manuscript of a death of a sister in Union City during the Spanish flu, and kind of narrates what was going on in the convent. And then a few other things. It's Ann Judson, a very famous American missionary to Burma, now Myanmar. And then the little guy with his hands raised, that's a bust of John Wesley made out of horse bone. So the 18th century Methodist founder. Okay, demographics. I don't have to tell you in some ways, but about some of what you are seeing probably around the country. A lot of this talk and what I'm going to talk about is kind of lifted from an article I wrote for the American Catholic Studies newsletter. And if you want to, you can find that online on Notre Dame's website for free and see it if you're interested to read it further. Now, closure and consolidation is not really new in the history of Catholicism in America. That's actually, it happened a lot in the 19th century, I would say, especially. And that was mostly because of population shifts moving to the west as land was opening up. But the Catholic population, did grow immensely, especially, I mean, really starting with the Irish and the Poles and then and Italians and then on and on. And now Catholics from all around the world, Philippines, Latin America predominantly. So obviously, it's still the largest denomination in the United States, and it's probably not going to change anytime soon, unless Carinthians Episcopalians really boom. And Patricia Whitberg, she wrote in an August 2012 article in America that there was about 50,000 sisters in the United States in 1900, and that her methodologies, and this is that methodology if you ever want to be a real data head and like see what precisely the number is now, but she worked from the Catholic Directory, right? And also that how to track the closures of and opening of new institutions. And by mid-century, it had led to over 180,000 Catholic sisters by mid-century, and then that's 265% growth in just 65 years. But this current moment is obviously women religious. It's not the same levels anymore. That was the moment around the baby boom, probably the Catholic baby boom after the war. In the midst of it, there's a baby boom everywhere, and obviously now we're down to about where we were in 1900, more or less. So community consolidation is kind of always a really difficult thing because they typically don't deposit things in a diocesan archive, right? And they're accountable to their own authority, how they're managed. They don't have to listen to the bishop on how they're managed per se. There have been some exceptions where bishop wants to get their hands involved. But most of it's sent to their provincial headquarters, mother houses, monasteries, or the like. But since many are coming to closure, the breaking point really for many is within the next decade, I would say. Dioceses are facing similar consolidation and closure challenges. We are in Chicago, with Renew My Church is what the Arch is calling it. And colloquially, people of the pew call it Destroy My Church. But nonetheless, that's also creating a lot of records problems because a lot of churches have records they never deposited with the Arch, and now have to figure out how to do that, and sometimes within a matter of days. So, and that has happened to some communities of men and all women too, that suddenly they're closing, and then can tell you stories about. I have a Claretian friend. Well, he's actually Benedictine, but he worked with the Claretians, and he was sent in, and he said, "You have to get this entire archive out in 5 days." And because the superior said, "We're selling the building," and so. So that's, I think this is real. It's a real issue, and it's one to be prepared for. Not to prepare for necessarily to move in 5 days. I hope that never happens to you. But it is the kind of a urging to also, as you are, in my opinion, as you're thinking about, as you are organizing your archive, also having an exit strategy. If you were told to move it to another congregation, another place. Maybe and finding out some place to take it. We'll talk about that today because that's a big conversation if you are in that boat. And the problem has been recognized by the Vatican. So, they had a Charism Creativity conference in Rome in 2022, a global conference, and the Pope spoke at it. And so there's recognizing, and also LCWR and ACWR obviously is recognizing this issue. And then, of course, we'll talk a little bit about where they should go. I can see there's a lot of representatives of some of these places here. Boston College is one, RAC, St. Mary's at Notre Dame, their collaborative archive. There's St. Clair has been doing some of it too. But that's a university-based solution, just like Boston College. So I'm going to make two arguments that I guess is something that we can also keep brainstorming on how, when we are going to our leadership or to the institutions that we're involved in. In my case, it's with a university. I always have to justify my existence, our existence with them. And I use a lot of guilt to do that. It's like, well, our Sentinel Dominican sisters, they created this whole thing. So, you have to, this is important for the nature of our archive. But then others are, I know other kind of orders are kind of converging. I think the Dominicans, we'll see what happens. There's, Sisters of Peace, and Sister Hope. Those were all mergers of various ones, and that's going to keep happening, I believe. So I hear from the conference on Sisters Below 65, I think it was, they had in Ohio last year. And the other one is scholarly. And that's another kind of angle of our argument to make. We have to make the argument of how essential Catholic history is to the history of the United States. And it's an argument I have to make a lot, including with my history department, that religious history matters and it should be taught. We used to have a church historian in the theology department. We lost that too. The line was not renewed. And we have no one in the history department that studies religion either. So it's not even just like Catholic history, it's like religion, period. Like religious history, they're not filling faculty lines at our university for that. And part of it is student related. A lot of people are not majoring in theology anymore, and that's a big thing. Some leadership changes have changed the requirements of majors and minors. And the theology requirement was, I think you had to take 8 theology courses in 1922 when we started. And now you only have to take 1 for your whole career at the university. So you can start seeing, and then part of that too is like demographic changes of who's teaching on campus. We don't have, let me see here. We could say this wrong. We have 4, and we're getting another 5th sister on campus, who's I think you're in her 30s, but they're not teaching. They're not in classroom. So they're mostly doing kind of ministry work on campus, working in the ministry center and things like that. So, I mean, all these kinds of pressures, even at a university-based one, can also bring pressure upon your archive. And so, one of the ways also I kind of get around that is I work with our graduate school of information studies, and that has been a big kind of tether that has made us relevant. And also just in telling my administration our great track record of placing people, and a majority of the places we place people are in religious archives. Corinthia is a good example of that. So I can name tons of names of who are all over across the country who are lay archivists who were trained by us. So that's one argument I can make. And then the other one is using it as kind of a laboratory for future, for history students to learn how to do archival research for the first time. And also for MLIS students, so Masters of Library Studies students, who sometimes have never been in an archive before either, even though they're going into the field. And so it's really, that's kind of the way so I'm actually in a former chemistry lab. So I use that to just kind of as a model of explaining my existence, as this is a laboratory for the university. For you to get you might not care about contemplative nuns at all, but they get interested once they're like, oh, these people are really interesting. You bring out the annals and they start reading about like the woman who died during the Spanish flu. We did a big thing about disease, Dominicans and disease, and there was a lot of interest in that, and how people were navigating that in a different pandemic time. So just kind of strategies like boost ourselves on campus. And I think that applies too, even if you're not at a university or or you're still at the Mother House or somewhere like that. Trying to find opportunities to reach out to the community. I know several people here who have also partnered and had classes that were just completely based out of the archive. That's also a good strategy on that side. But I've seen people have also go out to local historical societies and say, hey, we'll do the work, can you give us a wall? And then remind people that you have been impactful in that community. And that has been very effective. And especially because you start finding all these, oh, my aunt was taught by these sisters, or I was sometimes. And they do become magnets. And then what happens then is that the historical society starts to see how much you can draw people into them. You're also of value to them. They're like, oh, maybe this is like a big story that we're not telling in our local historical society or museum. Art exhibits too. Next summer, we're going to do a bunch of stuff about Corita Kent at the Notre Dame conference. That also gets, because they have a new art museum on Notre Dame's campus. Everything's new now, tearing down things and building new things. And so that's also helpful for getting people interested in the art history world, the whole campus world, that, oh, the art of women religious is really important, and foregrounding it, and introducing them to people that they were really important. I mean, Corita Kent was extremely impactful artist in the 20th century in pop art. And then also, using those things too, because obviously Corita's work is very activism oriented. And so if you want to tell a story about like women religious and activism, sometimes opportunities like that can really, really help. I've seen people do lots of cool stuff with nuns on the bus, which has made a good splash. Harvard Divinity School did something about nuns on the bus. Is it it's on the bus, I think. Yes. Then it says, okay, well, maybe, because if there's something interesting going on among women religious around the country that is kind of relates to what we're doing, or the kind of social movements I care about, perhaps. So that's some kind of a blend of both. But I like this quote from Pope Francis, where he says, he's talking about the historical record, and am I still on? Okay. He's talking about this historical record, and what he means by that is not just books and archival material, things that fit into Garvey boxes. He also means buildings, and obviously art as well. And so he's trying to understand how can we have this, retain this memory, and here's the reason why. He calls them testimonial goods, and then which preserve this community's charism in order to proclaim it anew, to rethink it and actualize it. We understand that the need and at times the burden of preservation can become an opportunity to renew, to rethink one's charism, and to recompose it in a current socio-cultural context, and to plan it for the future. And I think if you're within a community, also if you have novices and coming up, it's also a really, really important aspect of formation. I've heard from my older sisters that until Nona was retired and was at the mother house, they didn't talk about their history at all to the novices. And even though there had been books written about it, and they had a very, very, very well organized archive from the 19th century. And so then when Nona came on, she really held the candle for their history, and then every novice from probably 68, before 68, if you talk to Central Dominicans now, they all know their history really, really well. And they talk about that formation, about what their mission has been in a longitudinal way, right? From the beginning and how it's connecting to what they're doing now. And so we are getting new novices, Cincinnati Dominicans, and they often, what part of their trip, and also all the collaborative, we do collaborative novitiate in all the Dominicans, is they come to the Memorial Center and we talk about just Dominican history in general as a part of their formation. And I now have the friars coming to see us once a year, the friars who are of the Central Province. And so like last time they were here, I mean, we were at there must have been 20 people there, and they were all just really engaged. And some are theologians, so they're interested in that kind of thing. Some of them are interested in activism work, nursing, public activism, and so that's another kind of use we've had for it. And it also, if you notice this quote, it is a little bit of a nod to the directions out of the Second Vatican Council about renewing the charisms of the orders. And he's saying here that actually the historical record is essential to that. It's like he's kind of doing a riff on that kind of guidance out of the council. All right, just so you notice that. But then one thing I say too, and I work for the Dominicans, so this is going to be very Dominican charism oriented. A lot of things will be today. But I try to pitch it because they just changed all their leadership. So then you're working with different people, and they sometimes it depends on who's in leadership, right? If they're really passionate about this or not. But I always do a little bit of elevator pitch to them and say, this is essential so you can have the past preach to the future. With the historical record, that's possible. And you can lift things that give weight to the holy preaching, which they're renowned for, can give you a sense that we've been here for a long time. We have been teaching all across the world, and showing the impact of how consequential the congregation has been. And they can then use, and usually what happens then is that leadership then starts emailing you and says, hey, I'm going to be in front of some potential donors. Can you give me some really cool historical pictures or some stories that I can use? Or I'm trying to find a buyer for a building. That happened recently. Can you tell me about the designer of the chapel? So that has been some of our sacred spaces work was really important to that. Unfortunately, the buyer fell through, but they did get a buyer, but we had wonderful material about historical depth for when they go for the sale that they can then bring to potential buyers and say, hey, this place is not just a round building outside of Dubuque. It's actually has been very impactful, and not only in that, but also in mid-century modern design, like architecture design. So then they're like, well, let's start doing some kind of local architecture tours and putting them out on it. If you generate some local interest, then the people who are passionate about architecture in the region start putting you on the map, and that's can be really great for your reputational impact in the region. Okay, I'll just be a little bit scholar here, historian here. So you've probably read some of these books, but the first three are kind of the three, I would say there's more than this, but these are the ones that typically most people are talking about these days, and historians will call these are the synthesis books, where they try to bring all of, kind of understand what Catholic history is across the whole country. So John McGreevy, who he's now the provost at Notre Dame, this very famous one. It was on my exams list. You had to read it. Same with Jay Dolan, who recently passed. In Search of American Catholicism. He was also in the history department at Notre Dame. And part of the reason why all this stuff is going on Notre Dame is not only because it's big and they have money, but also it has a very strong reputation for their religious history, and they've always had a significant amount of scholars of American religion in that department, and also people who are interested in their very large theology department, which is I think they have 41 some faculty in there. It's incredible to imagine. So, and then I use those, and if you ever pick up one of these, I think you'll notice in them that there's usually a complaint somewhere in there. Why is this so hard to write these big synthesis books? Tell the story of all American Catholicism. And if you look at their footnotes, there's usually a note about before the notes, there's like a message from the author about the notes. And sometimes they'll tell you the great lengths that they went to write this book. Now, most of the synthesis books are mostly drawn from secondary sources. But a lot of the secondary literature also is very community-based. And the reason is because they worked that archive and they wrote a book about it. And probably many of your books, or your archives. And so you have these stories of groups, this like kind of like quilt of like secondary material predominantly. And these major synthesis writers are trying to pull from the quilt to make the quilt of American Catholicism, the history of American Catholicism. So the best example, and this is, I like to give because I love this book. Ann Butler is Across God's Frontiers. She is not with us anymore, but it is all about Catholic sisters in the American West. And so she says this at the end of her, actually I think she says this in the introduction, where she's kind of complaining about how fractured archival material is for the study of American Catholicism. So she wrote 125 letters to discrete congregations of women from the Mississippi to the Pacific Ocean. She got 90 to respond to her positively, and then 2 declining involvement. And then she went to all 90 of them. So there's a lot of considerations there, right? Because that means you have to get the travel, and that's, I mean, that's not easy to do, to go to 90 places. She said, thankfully, a lot of the sisters put her up for free, which was kind of them. But like, still, you have to get in a car on a plane and go somewhere, and then keep track of and that's just an incredible amount of work. And then she says the state of these archives are wildly divergent. So she writes, they range from state-of-the-art facilities to a cordoned-off basement close to a sump boiler and 2 sump pumps, with ledgers on the floor, or in bookcases under the water pipes. Yeah, I imagine I don't know what she has said to those communities about that. But we've seen it in American religious history broadly too. I knew a guy who was trying to collect baptismal records in New England, and the things he would find. I mean, these things from the 17th century that are just in a dusty bin in the basement, and sometimes they didn't even know they had them, because the community, the leadership changes, the pastors change. So, and I think this is one reason that I want to make a pitch for the digital. I'm not saying you have to digitize everything, but if you could find out where things were digitally, this is a huge task, and it will not be done in our lifetime, but all communities of Catholicism in the United States, it would be groundbreaking. It really would. And one of the other complaints about the synthetic histories too is that, and you'll hear people say this at history conferences, when you write a grand history of Catholicism, there's just never enough woman religious in it. It's the scene, there's a kind of complaint that there's not a lot of people, not enough people writing about it, not enough in the history field. They're coming up, and that's changing though. I would say at the Notre Dame conference, we had the most applications ever by a lot, like maybe a 30% increase for this year. That's good news. That's really good news. But those historians, those upcoming historians, have to find it and figure out how to find it. And so having your records in some kind of online way, even if you don't have them actually scanned, that's probably step 2, you can at least help somebody out a lot. Also, the other thing about that is if we could all get on the same page around subject headings on how we describe things, that would make it really easy, much easier for everybody. There's other things too. This is terms. so this is one of the things that are unique about, especially women religious and Catholic art, records in general. They change names, right? Sometimes after Vatican II, they went back to their birth name. Sometimes they kept their when they took vows. And then they had a life before that. And then sometimes people leave the community and then they get married. And there's another name on there. So this is, we have ways of understanding how to because people change their names quite a bit. But it does create a little bit of challenge. And the other thing too is describing things in similar ways, right? So that would help too, because if everybody was able to kind of, for example, say I had met somebody who wanted to work on women religious and cancer care in the United States. That was a dissertation. And so she's just rummaging around the whole country online trying to find, who was in healthcare, what kind of healthcare were they in, all this kind of stuff. It was really a big task. And the ones that had digital that she could find online, those are the ones that got written about. And so it's just true. It's just too hard to goose chase it, right, around the country. So, yeah, and so I think that's another argument for your value. We mattered. We mattered, our community. And we need to show our story so other people can tell it, right? And that's my soapbox, all right? Also, too, maybe another thing that comes up, I did fail to say this. Some people also run into a lot of walls around distrust and worry about they might find something embarrassing in there, and they might. Some places let you read their annals, but some of the annals are pretty honest about what's going on. Some congregations have opened up their personnel records. So that's, now a lot of people don't want to do that, and I understand why. But you can make a policy saying X amount, after X amount of years, even personnel records can be open. Because that's where a lot of the disciplinary stuff comes in. And also how, how much money they brought into the community when they came in. There's going to be a new essay in U.S. Catholic Historian, which I just peer-reviewed, about one of our sisters, or Cincinnati sisters, and she was the heiress of this man who basically came up with billboards in the 19th century, and she brought in a lot of money to the community. But it was, she was and it apparently hit the New York Times that the socialite is becoming a nun, and there's this picture of her with the mink stole and stuff like that. And her brother had to defend her in the press, saying, no, she really is a devout Catholic. It makes sense, I promise you. It makes sense. They even offered them a mansion in Denver somewhere in Colorado. So, these are the kinds of things that can come out. But there was a lot of, the reason why she was able to do that, though, which is a really interesting story, is because she worked with really well indexed and searchable and findable archives. And so it was easy to find where they were, and came up with a really great story. Okay. So, yeah, this is typically what people are doing. Institutional organizations that's related to your community, so that usually ends up looking like, especially if your community was ever in higher ed, that's usually where they go. I'll tell you a story about about that. Our center was founded by Nona, and then also Sister Janet kind of brought it off the ground, that it would be the centralized archives of all Dominicans in the United States. Okay. So then that seemed like it wasn't going to be possible, and they did some studies, and so right now it seems like mostly people are finding their own solutions, and some people don't need a solution because they don't have a problem. Since Nawa is sending their stuff to Boston College, last I heard. So that's which is making a lot of sisters mad, because like we don't have a major presence in Boston, and we are mostly Midwestern like concentrated. And so then when Cincinnati was needed to find a place for theirs, they came to our university, and there was a previous president, and they said, hey, we want our collection to go to you. A very highly used collection, and very well organized. And the president said no, and kind of broke her heart. Well, I know who asked her, but broke the sister's heart that the university that they founded, that is actually thriving. It's unlike a lot of higher ed right now, just a straight no. And that created some relationship issues with the sponsoring congregation. So, that's part of kind of the passion that, Holly's here also, and Lisa's here, but some of these people who are interested in kind of founding more spots for collaborative archives is because putting them in places where they regionally make sense, and also kind of finding innovative kind of financial solutions for their upkeep and care. Okay, that leads well into collaborative archive centers. So I saw some people from RAC here, so that's obviously a big story. And but of course, the models are all over the place, like how they set those up, which is always a big discussion in groups like this, if you're ever on those calls. Are we going to do completely fundraise it? Are we going to ask congregations for endowment? Then what would that endowment need to be in order to get in the door? How much room do we have? Who gets the room first over other people? That's also a consideration. There's a lot of congregations in quite small ones in Chicago that were kind of in like unhoused care, like that was their ministry, was with the unhoused. And once they have gone bankrupt because now that there's only 5 sisters left, and because they didn't once they sold their mother house, they spent all the money on health care for their elderly sisters, right? Which is a very common story, and it's something is usually very high in the minds of leadership. Is like, of course, they need to take care of the health care of their sisters, and we need to plan for that and figure that out. And my point of that is an equity thing, where the reason I'm involved with some of this stuff in Chicago is we want to, I won't name everyone who's on there. We want to find a place where if you're a wealthy congregation, say maybe you're in like owned hospitals, for example, or if one that has gone bankrupt, that all should have a place in it. So we got to figure out how to do that, and that's also kind of a, it's nice if Franciscans were big in healthcare, but they're maybe another example is better, but when they did something really incredible in Peoria for those group of Franciscan sisters, and really innovative ideas of how to figure it out, which is good. But they had the funding to do it, and they did it. But just because you're not ending your historical mission sitting on some cash, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a place at the table. Okay. And we've already talked about the different other places around the country. The other one that happens is regional secular institutions. So what happens there typically is good example is actually this painting. This is from one of our contemplative nuns. And for some reason, it ended up in a community college, in the Hudson Valley Community College. It's extensive collection of art, and by a very significant artist. I mean, she knew Andy Warhol and stuff, and I think her studio was like right around there. So so that, I think what happened was when the monastery closed, they packed up all their paper, and and we got it, and then they have all this art then, and they're like, well, archives don't take art, right? So it ended up going to a regional, and that could make sense, but it has been used a little bit to remind people about the Blue Chapel and its significance in the area. It's hard for contemplative nuns to have, when they're not in schools and like in universities and stuff, to show if all they do behind closed doors. You know, it's always a challenge sometimes, and so that was a good way of kind of showing the region just how important monasteries can be for the cultural life of the area. She also did like vestments and stuff, and she was like worked in everything. Okay. Yep, so here's some of the major players on the collaborative side. I won't go into that much farther. Let's see here. Okay, yeah, we all talked about money a little bit. Let's see how I'm doing on time. What's that? Oh, sorry. Okay, we're doing good. I'll kind of go this quickly. I think we talked about fundraising. The gift one is interesting because if someone offers to take it for free, there's a lot of questions you have to ask about that. Because then you have to, how are they going to handle it? How are they going to talk about your charism in that collection? Do you trust them? Or do you want to send an archivist with the collection to a free place? That has been done. The congregation will send the archivist with the collection to wherever it lands. So that is something you just have to think about. That goes down to the last one, is like the agreements. Just figuring out what are the agreements and how, if you're comfortable with it. It's free is, I think I quote Marcel Mauss in the article I was talking about, and he says the gift is never free, and in his opinion, that's good, because it gives you a chance to do some reciprocity that maybe he thought was bring peace to the world. We'll get into Marcel Mauss. All right, this is back to Sister Mary Navarre, who likes to quote Hamilton and says, "Who's going to tell your story to people?" I've borrowed that, and I always credit you, Sister Mary. And Lin-Manuel Miranda, I guess, just as a kind of a good opening kind of conversation piece when you're trying to open up a sometimes difficult conversation, where especially if you have someone in front of you who's like, I just want to get rid of it, I just want it out of here, and that, I understand that sentiment. I've been cleaning out my garage. I get it, but your congregational archive is not the junk in my garage. It is your story. And then asking too, like if you're going to a place, even like a place like going to a Jesuit institution, which the Jesuits don't have women, as you guys know. So there's that. There's that aspect, and then also well, I guess the Pope made them take 2 women, I think, in the 16th century, something like that. But also, are the people who are taking care of will be taking care of your collection know anything about A, American Catholic history, B, the charism of your community? And then what do you then need to do to prepare them, get them up to speed? They might not even have heard of the concept of charism before, period. And so it's kind of thinking about the catechesis, I guess you could say, it's not a proper term, but like what kind of education you need to do to make sure your collection is understood and why the things are the way they are. That really helps somebody out. And maybe, I have a new archivist who never worked with Catholic collections before. She started in July. I gave her a pile of books. I was like, go home and read for a week. So, and she came back and was like, oh, I see. So, and so that it just helps them, getting that training built into, especially even if you're sending your collection to somewhere else. Okay. So I think we covered almost all this stuff. So I do want to move on to discussion. But these are kind of some of my suggestions. You can read it more in depth of the questions I ask in the article if you're curious. But yeah, just thinking through all these kinds of major themes or topics as you are thinking about your collection and its future. And all right, so I hope some of these suggestions are kind of fired something in you, and we can have a good discussion, and we can share ideas with each other. We can share our ideas this week and weekend around lunch and stuff, because I know this is a big topic. And I know there's going to be a lot of these kinds of sessions at Notre Dame next summer, so if you want to rejoin the party and ask for, travel money to go. There's going to be a lot of there'll be a lot of things of people like ACWR, but also a lot of scholars who are talking about their work and also how they're working with collections, which is always interesting to know how it's being used, which is often illuminating for people who are running archives a lot. And they also tell you their frustrations, which is also can be helpful sometimes to hear. All right, thank you. This is Cincinnati Mound. That was the brown building in the back is the building I was talking about earlier. This is a Mother House Cincinnati Dominicans. Right, last is my pitch for next summer, and I think I'm set. So, Curlith, you want to do this?
Okay, so now the floor is open to anybody who has questions. Just let me know and I'll bring the mic to you. Oh, so far.
I just want to make a correction. It's not St. Mary's College. It's the research. It's a Heritage and Research Center at St. Mary's, and it is the St. Mary's Holy Cross Sisters, and that is a very important distinction. It is not St. Mary's College.
Was that intentional?
Yes, it was very intentional. Yeah. And if you have the whole, Monty will speak about this, but it is really important because the college is no longer, it's a separate 501c3, whatever. But it's not, it's very important to the sisters that it be St. Mary's, and that was intentional, that it is HARC, which is the Heritage and Research Center at St. Mary's, but it's not the college.
Right.
They do some collaboration with the college, but it is not St. Mary's College.
Thanks for the clarification. That's good.
Thank you, Dr. Allison, for your speech. You mentioned that communities with digital collections are the only ones that get written about. For those of us who a digital collection is unrealistic, do you have any suggestions about how we can tell our stories or get our stories out to researchers?
Yeah. I mean, that's a little bit hyperbole, but if because it is true that some don't have like archive space or Atom, which is access to memory, that kind of like archival management software, or have their finding aids online, like well documented online. Some of those places you don't have those things do get written about, but they tend to get written about in a very strategic and surgical way because they already know for some reason that this is where I need to find my stuff. I think it's the best you can do if you can swing it is just have a really great website description of what kind of stuff you have, and that would really help. Because if historians are doing like a more topical project, like I worked with Adrian and then also Grand Rapids Dominicans. And it was easy. I was trying to tell a story about like architecture by women religious in the Midwest, but I could find it pretty easily. So those kind of like broader topical things. So if you could get something somewhere that's kind of like can be Googleable, and say, hey, we have a massive collection of ceramics, perhaps, And then someone who is not studying religious history might be very, very interested in that because they're writing about American ceramics or something. You see what I mean? So, and I think it's good to brainstorm, like, who are the kinds of people who might be really interested in what we have? You know what you have. And so kind of giving a really great description in that respect can be really helpful for people to find you and then get in contact to see if it can be written about. You can also do outreach too. If you find people, just talking to people and asking about what they're interested in. And then if you outreach into like going to conferences or stuff and say, hey, well, my collection, and someone's talking about whatever, like my collection has a lot of that. Come see us, right? So, but I think if you can get some kind of, even the lightest of digital presences in terms of just even describing things, that's a good step.
Thanks, Chris. I know you hit on what I was going to say at the end there.
Yeah.
Attending a conference like this and talking to others about what they have in their archive is important. And go to the History of Women Religious, hand out your card,
Yeah.
talk to people, and I think all of you should know to say to another archivist or to a researcher, if I don't have it, I think so-and-so has it over here. You should know what the landscape around the country and the world is of records on nursing, education, healthcare, anything, and point the researchers there. And do some research yourself to find out who's got what. And not to disparage Chris, but every historian wants everything digitized.
I still like the real thing, I will say, but yeah, you're right. You're right. No. Yep. Oh, and maybe while Corinthia is walking, another thing too, by getting good descriptions of things. So, like one complaint in labor history, or where religious historians complain about the field of labor history, is they never talk about Catholics, or they don't do it enough, which doesn't make any sense. But when they think labor workers, they go to union archives. Of course they do, So that you can also kind of think about ways you can wrap in maybe fields that are just same with art historians. I mean, when I was at Harvard when they were doing the Corita Kent show, I worked behind the scenes on that show because nobody in the whole building knew anything about, except for the medievalists, about really religion at all. And so, like, what is Corita say? Well, that's a reference to, like, the Gospel of Matthew, like helping, but an incredibly important pop artist in the 20th century. Yeah.
Hey, Chris, Lisa Gibbon from the Congregation of St. Joseph Archives in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm so glad you ended with this slide and glad that Ellen mentioned it because I love this conference. I've been to 2 or 3 of them, and when I'm there, I just really feel like why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I get great ideas like, we've got that. So, but my comment that I really wanted to make had to do with collaborative, getting collaborative. So in my particular situation, I do not plan to physically move my archives in the next 10 years. However, as a small staff place, I am not a cataloger. I am not a digital maven. I do not want to pick a content management system. The one that I did pick, I don't even really like it very much, so I don't even use it. I delegate other people to use it. And as Sarah Lubelski is here can attest, where she is. There's Sarah, former assistant director. But the great thing about these collaborative ventures, and I am working with RAC to ensure that I can be a collaborator. Yeah. So I don't have to physically join them. And this is what I really want other people to think about doing too, because RAC can pick their own digital content management system.
Yeah.
I can collaborate. I can share my finding aids because I'm a traditional archivist. I can make a finding aid like nobody, but I cannot figure out how to catalog it. So that's what they can do for me. And I can and then my materials are not siloed off in my own little online someplace where you have to stumble across me. Like for me, it's all about access, right? How am I going to get access and how am I going to delegate all of those chores that I mean, the internet was like invented when I was in grad school. We used
Yeah.
to sit around and talk about how are we going to organize this at happy hour?
Yeah.
Should we start organizing this new internet?
Yeah.
This World Wide Web thing, I mean, I am old, man, I just don't want to do it. So I'm so glad that there's these collaborative ventures out there. I can identify where I'm really falling short,
Yeah.
how I can improve my access and ask other people to help me do it. So
Yeah,
that's what I
great.
really encourage, a lot of us, these smaller shops where we're not planning on joining anything physically. How can we collaborate electronically?
Yeah, that's a great one. And I've done it recently too with the Central Province of Dominicans. They built a new space. It's beautiful, but the archive is just literally boxes. It's just in boxes. It's never been formally organized. But they came to me, and so the deal was they would use our archive space in our Omeka and our library cataloging system. And so then they can put their books in there. It says location, Central Province Archives in Pilsen, and if somebody wants that book. So it's a great model to explore if you have, especially if you have some area who's willing to play ball with you, and
Hi, Michelle from Dominican Sisters of Peace in Columbus. And I wanted to make sure that everybody knows about Archive Grid. It's an OCLC product that actually trolls the internet looking for any website that says the word archival finding aid. It does this automatically. You do not have to add anything to it. All you need to do is make sure your website has anywhere on it that the archive has finding aids. And then what will happen is it will populate in their grid, and you can do searches for Dominicans, for Jesuits, for however you want to do it, and it gives you results as by location or by topic or by name. And this is a free product. I tell all of the researchers that I run into about this. Every historian should know about Archive Grid. It's a wonderful tool. It's free to use, and it allows your collections to be discoverable without having to set up your own Omeka site.
it's good.
We only have time, I think, for 3 more questions, so I'm going to go to the next 3 people.
Oh, thanks.
So I just want to dovetail off of Lisa. And full disclosure, I'm leading one of the collaboratives, but I really appreciate your presentation, Chris, and I've appreciated what you've done in writing about women religious. And I just think, we are at a point where we need to look at how do we all row together in the same direction. So, it's going to take the collaboratives, it's going to take the charism families, it's going to take wherever the individual repositories are, that we kind of break down this idea of suspicion of if it's free, that your story isn't going to get told or it's not going to get raised up. I mean, I think what we need to do is say, people are making a choice based on what their financial ability is. And that doesn't mean that that story is any less important. So, I just want to put out there that I think we need to break down that suspicious nature that appears to be kind of cropping up out there and instead say, how do we create this connectivity, which really is what the national program, what Hilton wants to see us do, so that these collections are available in some way in an easy access form to find out where something rests. Now, what the policies would be at a particular place is up to that space. But again, looking at those agreements carefully. But I just feel like we need to be more positive about how we're moving forward and lifting each other up in this process, and that it's going to take all of us.
The only quick story about that is congregation I was working with recently, they're moving it to another, they have a spot for it. And their anxiety was, well, what happens when we have a wake and it's in storage? And that, like, okay. So, I mean, they were trying to decide, okay, maybe we can retain some of our stuff still with us and send the rest of the archive to there, just for those, like, daily congregational needs. Or, not daily, but, like, when someone passes. Yeah.
I'm Peter Schmid with the Sisters of Providence Archives in Seattle, Washington. And just as kind of an answer, but just going back to digital collaboration, I think another opportunity would just to be to see if there's somebody regionally who could host, like even if you're not prepared to publish finding aids, like host 50 of your most iconic photographs on their Content DM site or something like that is a good opportunity. They have to be prepared, of course, to put your credit line and your contact information and all that. But it's a good way to at least get some footprint out there and get your name out.
And sometimes some region, like in Illinois, Carly is our regional collaborative, like all libraries and special collections in northern, I think mostly northern Illinois. And because we're part of Carly, we get a part of our dues gets us an instance of Content DM. But you have to do it by Carly's way. You know, they're going to tell you how to do it. And they also make a stipulation that it has to be public access. So you can't put things in Content DM and ghost them, which you can do in Content DM. So that's their only requirements. But you might have regional library groups that you could. It's by FTE, so you might be very reasonable to join, and then you could get some little kind of extras with that membership.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Griffith. I'm working with the Notre Dame Sisters in Omaha, Nebraska, not to be confused with the School Sisters of Notre Dame. And although they did teach quite a lot, and that's sort of what my question is about, I'm finding more and more that so the archive that we have has been beautifully taken care of, but it sort of only contains the official publications or the things that were officially created by the institution. And then I'm finding in talking to the sisters that they have so much material themselves about their work that has never made it into the archive because they feel like it's not relevant. And so I'm curious about if, for Chris and for anybody else, ways to approach that to make sure that nothing is left out. And then also, the Notre Dame Sisters had an academy, an all-girls boarding school, and many of their alumni are still around and young. I mean, they closed in the mid-70s. And so, does anybody have any experience or in terms of completing the archive of gathering materials from alumni as well? Because I'm finding that, contrary to many other community archives that I've encountered, that sisters will sometimes downplay their own significance in the contribution to the creation of the archive.
Yes, sometimes you have to boost them up and say what you did really matters. It does belong here, right? And sometimes people can kind of have a lot of humility, and you have to give us like, no, like you did something big. And I would say around the alumni networks, we were doing a centennial history exhibit at Dominican, and we looked at the yearbooks and we were like, this isn't right. There's got to be some more than this. So I asked our university archivist this. He says, nope, that's all of them. And so I was like, okay, I don't believe you, but okay. All of them he has, right? So, and not all of them. And so then we worked with the alumni office, and we did a kind of Facebook splash, and we got a couple that way. Yeah, actually, we ended up with 12 unknown yearbooks that had been just kind of scattered around. Some from at the Mother House. They came down from the Mother House, so that was, completed the record.
Okay, the last one, and then announcements.
In your toolkit and soon to be published on the ACWR website, you will find 21 sites in United States and Canada that are willing to accept congregations of women religious archives. We need all of them and more. We need them not to feel competitive with one another. We do not want to put all these beautiful treasured eggs in one basket, because that basket something could happen to it. So look there. They're updated. I personally emailed every single one of them. I asked, is this what you want to say? Is it okay to publish it? And who do we contact? So it's fresh and new, and we'll keep it updated with the ACWR. So it's a great source.
Thank you. All right. So thank you, everybody, and thank you, Dr. Allison.